Welcome to HFY Codex. If you love epic sci-fi stories where humanity shines, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for thrilling HFY adventures. Join us and be part of the journey. The cry in the forest. The snow was thick on the ground. Cold wind pushing through the broken trees. Jake pulled his scarf higher over his mouth, eyes scanning the quiet forest. He had come to this part of the planet looking for scrap, old tech, maybe food. His ship was broken, and if he didn't find parts soon, he would freeze before the next moon. The planet was not safe. He had heard stories, strange animals, wild hunters, things that moved in the dark. But Jake was used to danger. He had survived worse places, colder nights, and louder. Guns, he moved slowly. Checking under some ice-covered wreckage, it looked like an old transport pod, broken in two like a cracked egg. Nothing useful, just broken wires and half-melted plastic. He sighed and stood up. Then he froze. There was a sound, not far behind. Him? Not an animal? Not wind? It was a voice, small and shaking. "Please, human?" Jake turned fast, hand going to the knife on his belt. At first, he saw nothing. Then, movement just behind a fallen tree. A small figure crawled out, barely reaching his waist. It was a child, but not human. She had gray skin, glowing blue eyes, and soft white hair tangled with bits of snow. She wore torn clothes, barely enough to cover her thin arms and legs. One of her hands held a weak, blinking translator. "Please, human," she repeated. "My mom's caught in a trap." Jake blinked, confused. Was this real? A trick? But the fear in her eyes was real. The cold was real. And behind her, far off in the trees, he heard it. A cry of pain, long and low. "Where?" he asked, slowly. The girl pointed with her shaking hand. Jake hesitated. This could be bait, a trap. But something inside him pushed him forward. "Show me," he said. She turned and started running, slipping through the snow. Jake followed. Steps heavy, hand on his knife just in case. They moved fast, the wind howling around them. The girl didn't speak again, only looked back once to make sure he was still behind her. After 10 minutes, they reached a small clearing. In the center, hanging from a tall tree, was another figure, an adult alien woman. Her leg was caught in a thick metal wire that glowed with strange energy. She hung upside down, blood on her forehead, her arms reaching weakly toward the ground. "Mom!" The girl cried and ran forward. Jake rushed to stop her. "Wait, it could be dangerous," he said, pulling her back. He looked at the trap. It was alien tech, sharp, cruel, and coated with poison. He had seen traps like this before. They were used by hunters who didn't care what they caught, and they didn't set just one. Jake scanned the trees, heart beating fast. Everything was too quiet. Still, he couldn't leave the woman like this. He pulled a tool from his bag and began working. On the trap, the energy sparked. The wire hissed. Jake winced as one of the sparks burned his glove, but he didn't stop. The girl knelt beside him, holding her mother's hand. "She's burning inside," she whispered, voice cracking. Jake nodded. "No," he said. "I'll get her down." After a few tense minutes, the wire snapped. Jake caught the alien woman before she hit the ground. She was heavy and cold, skin damp with sweat. He looked at the girl. "We need to find shelter." She nodded, tears on her cheeks. "I know a cave," she said. "Not far." Together, they carried the woman through the snow. Jake's back ached, and the cold bit into his skin. But he didn't stop. The girl kept whispering to her mother in a soft alien tongue. Jake didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling, hope mixed with fear. Finally, they reached a cave, hidden. Between tall stones, Jake set the woman down and started a small fire with his last fuel cell. Warmth filled the cave, but outside the wind still screamed. The girl sat close to her mother, holding her tightly. Jake sat near the entrance, knife in hand, eyes on the dark forest. They were safe for now. But he knew whoever set that trap would come back, and next time they wouldn't be alone. The broken mother, inside the cave. The air was warmer, but not safe. The fire crackled softly, filling the space with a gentle orange glow. Jake crouched beside the injured alien woman, checking her wounds carefully. Her breathing was shallow and her eyes blinked slowly. Full of pain and confusion, the child sat close, holding her mother's hand tightly. She hadn't let go since they arrived. Her small shoulders shook, but she didn't cry. She was trying to be brave. Jake opened his kit and pulled out a small scanner. It beeped softly as he ran it over the woman's leg. The trap had burned deep, metal had fused into skin, and something was spreading under the surface. The scanner flashed red, poison detected. He looked at the girl. "She needs help fast," he said. The child nodded, but her eyes were lost. Jake sighed and reached for a small injector. "I can stop the poison, but it's temporary," he said. "We need real medicine." The mother stirred, her voice barely a whisper. "Dari?" The child leaned forward. "I'm here, Mama," she said in her soft, alien voice. Jake gently pressed the injector to the wound. The device hissed, and the woman flinched, then let out a long, low breath. The redness on her skin began to fade. Slowly, she turned her head, looking straight at Jake. Her eyes were bright but filled with suspicion. "Human," she rasped. "Why are you helping us?" Jake didn't answer right away. He looked down at his burned gloves, his scraped arms. He didn't know. Maybe he was tired of running from every fight. Maybe he saw something in the child's eyes. Or maybe it just felt right. "You were trapped," he finally said. "And she asked me?" The alien mother stared at him for a long time, then nodded slowly. "You saved my daughter," she said, her voice rough. "For that, I thank you." Jake nodded back. "She saved you first," he replied. Suddenly the fire flickered. Jake looked toward the cave entrance. Outside, the wind had changed. Colder, sharper. He stood and walked toward the opening, stepping quietly. The snow outside looked untouched, but Jake's instincts were sharp. Someone, or something, was nearby. He scanned the tree line with a small device, but it showed nothing. Still, he didn't trust it. He returned inside and added more wood to the fire. "We can't stay here long," he said. "I think someone's watching." The woman tried to sit up but groaned in pain. Jake knelt beside her. "Don't move yet," he said. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then answered, "Lyra." Jake looked at the child. "And you?" The little girl sat up straighter, her eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. "I'm Dari," she said with a small smile, "and I think you're strong, like the mountain men in our stories." Jake chuckled, but softly. "I'm just a tired man with cold feet." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, then whispered, "They'll come back for the trap." Jake nodded. "I know," he said. "That's why we're going to move before they do." "But I can't walk," Lyra said. "I'll carry you," Jake replied without thinking. Lyra opened her eyes again, surprised. "Why?" Jake looked at Dari, who was now wrapping a blanket around her mother's arm. "Because I don't leave people behind," he said. "Not anymore." He began packing up his things, small tools, wires, bits of food, anything useful. He wrapped Lyra's leg tightly and built a simple sled using broken branches and his jacket. Dari helped, following every order without complaint. As Jake lifted Lyra onto the sled, she winced but said nothing. Dari climbed beside her, holding her mother's hand. "Where will we go?" Lyra asked quietly. Jake looked at the stars above the trees. "Somewhere safer," he said. "Somewhere they won't find you." And without another word, He pulled the sled out into the cold night. The snow fell gently now, covering their trail slowly. But in Jake's mind, one question kept burning. Who were these hunters? And why were they setting traps in the first place? He didn't know it yet. But this was only the beginning. The hunters' return. The sun was gone now, hidden behind gray skies and falling snow. Jake pulled the sled slowly through the frozen trees, every step harder than the last. His legs were sore, his arms burning, but he didn't stop. Dari walked. Beside him, quiet and alert, her small hand sometimes brushing his coat. Behind them, Lyra lay on the sled, her eyes half closed, lips pale. She had said nothing for the past hour. Only breathing softly, the cold was slowing her down, and Jake knew time was running out. "We need shelter," he said out loud, mostly to himself, but Dari heard, and she pointed ahead. "There," she whispered. "There's a place my people used long ago." Jake followed her direction. Soon they reached an old supply shelter, half buried in snow. Made of scrap metal and faded fabric, he cleared the entrance and carried Lyra inside. It wasn't much, but it blocked the wind, and there was space to build a small fire. Jake lit the fire quickly, the orange glow dancing on the metal walls. He placed his last heating rod beside Lyra's body, then covered her with both his coats. Dari sat near her mother, watching every move Jake made. Jake sat against the wall, rubbing his hands together. His mind wasn't calm. Something kept bothering him. He hadn't seen any animals in hours. No tracks, no movement, not even birds. The forest was too quiet, dead quiet. He stood up and peeked through a hole in the shelter wall. The trees outside swayed gently in the wind, but nothing moved beneath them. Still. Jake felt it. Eyes. Watching. Waiting. He went back and checked his weapon. A short-range blaster low on charge. He had 2 charges left, maybe 3. Not enough for a fight. He turned to Dari. "Who are they?" he asked. "The ones who set the trap." Dari looked at her mother, then at the floor. "They're not from this land," she whispered. "They come from the black ship in the clouds." Jake blinked. "You mean orbit?" She nodded. "They drop from the sky, take what they want, and leave traps behind." Jake felt a chill. Pirates, maybe, or worse. Slavers. He'd heard rumors about black market hunters looking for rare species. And Lyra's people, quiet, hidden, might be their perfect prey. Suddenly, a sharp click echoed outside. Jake froze. Another click, closer this time, metal boots in snow. He blew out the fire quickly, plunging the shelter into darkness. "Stay low," he whispered to Dari, then moved to the door. Through the torn fabric, he saw them. 3 figures moving through the trees, tall, armored, weapons in hand, their eyes glowing red in the dark. One of them knelt near their sled tracks, scanning the ground. Another pointed directly toward the shelter. Jake's grip on his blaster tightened. He turned to Dari and whispered, "If anything happens to me, you run. You take your mother and run." Dari shook her head, tears forming. "I won't leave you." Jake gave a small smile. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." The fabric covering the entrance moved slightly. Jake waited, heart pounding. One of the hunters stepped in, slowly, scanning the dark with a red light. Jake didn't move, didn't breathe. The hunter stepped further inside. Closer, closer. Then, Jake struck. He slammed a metal bar into the hunter's arm, knocking the scanner away. The light spun across the room, flashing against the wall. Jake fired his blaster once. Boom! The shot hit the hunter's shoulder, sending sparks flying. The second hunter rushed in, yelling something in a language. Jake didn't understand. Jake grabbed the fallen scanner and tossed it at him, buying a few seconds. Then he ducked back behind the wall. Pulling Dari and Lyra closer to the back of the shelter, shots rang out, small explosions shaking the thin walls. Jake fired again, his second-to-last shot, hitting one of the metal beams above, causing part of the roof to fall. Dust and snow poured in. Blinding the attackers for a moment, Jake used the chance to grab Dari and Lyra. Pulling them out through the back flap of the shelter, they ran, snow biting at their faces, trees rushing past. Behind them, the hunters shouted but didn't follow immediately. Jake led them down a steep slope, sliding through icy roots and rocks. They reached a small frozen stream and crossed it fast, covering their tracks with snow. Only after they were far enough did Jake stop. He leaned against a tree, panting. Dari stood beside him, holding her mother's hand. "They'll come. Again," she said softly. Jake nodded. "Then we'll be ready," he said. "I won't let them take you." The stars above blinked faintly through the clouds, and in that moment, Jake knew. This wasn't just about helping strangers anymore. This was a fight he had to finish. Fire in the snow. The wind had picked up, sharper now, like blades in the air. Jake's breath came in clouds as he marched through the dark forest. Pulling Lyra's sled behind him, every shadow looked like danger. Every noise made him reach for his blaster. Dari walked beside him, quiet but alert, her eyes scanning just like his. They had gone deeper into the forest, hoping the hunters wouldn't follow. But Jake knew better. These weren't just wild killers. They were trained, patient, and cruel. He needed a plan. He couldn't keep running, not with Lyra half-conscious, her leg turning purple from poison, not with Dari, small and brave but tired from fear. They needed to fight back. He found a clearing near the cliff edge, open space, flat ground, one way in. "This is where we stand," he said, dropping the sled. Dari looked up at him, confused. "You said we'd hide." Jake shook his head. "Hiding won't stop them," he said. "But fire might." He began working fast, gathering dry wood, broken branches, scrap wires, and old metal plates from his bag. He dug a shallow trench and filled it with oil-soaked cloth. He placed flash mines around the trees and set tripwires using fishing line and hooks. Dari watched him silently, then slowly began to help. She placed stones to mark the edge of the traps and used a broken signal light as bait. Jake noticed her hands weren't shaking anymore. She was scared. But she wasn't frozen. Inside, Lyra opened her eyes weakly. "You're staying to fight," she said in a hoarse voice. Jake nodded. "They won't stop," he replied. "And if I run, they'll just hunt someone else." She tried to sit up but groaned. "You can't fight them alone." "I'm not alone," Jake said, glancing at Dari, who was now lighting a fuse cord carefully. Night came fast, the sky turned black, and snow started falling again. The fire Jake lit in the center of the clearing burned hot, casting long shadows. The traps were ready, weapons charged, and every heartbeat echoed louder in Jake's chest. Then, just as he expected, the forest moved. 3 red lights appeared between the trees, eyes of the hunters. Their steps were slow, steady, unafraid. They had found them. Jake stood at the edge of the fire, blaster raised. "Come closer," he whispered. "I dare you." The first hunter stepped into the firelight, tall, armored, holding a plasma spear. Jake fired once, not to hit, but to lead. The shot struck the ground near the hunter's foot. The hunter stepped forward, right onto the first tripwire. Snap! Boom! The mine exploded, sending smoke and sparks flying. The second hunter jumped forward but hit the second wire. Flash! Blinding light burst into the air and Jake rushed in, tackling the disoriented attacker. They rolled across the ground, Jake punching, kicking, grabbing the hunter's blade and jamming it into the armor joint. The hunter screamed and went still, but the third hunter had reached the sled. He raised his weapon toward Lyra and Dari. "No!" Jake yelled. He sprinted toward them, blaster empty, out of time, but Dari didn't freeze. She pulled the last flare from Jake's bag and threw it into the fire. The flames roared up, blinding red light shooting into the sky. The hunter turned, confused by the sudden blaze. That's when Jake hit him with a metal rod, knocking the weapon aside. They fought hard. Punches, slams, grunts in the snow. Jake took a hard hit to the ribs, fell, then got up again, blood on his lip. He grabbed a fallen spear and drove it into the hunter's side. The armor cracked, and the enemy dropped. Silence returned to the forest. The fire burned steady, the traps were spent, the snow soaked in dark streaks. Jake stood there, chest rising and falling, hands shaking. He looked at Dari, who rushed to hug him tight. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved us again." Lyra leaned up on her elbow, her voice soft. "You're not just a fighter," she said. "You're one of us now." Jake looked at the night sky, stars peeking through the clouds. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. He had defended something that mattered. Not a job, not a mission, a family, but it wasn't over. Not yet. There were more hunters, more traps, and a secret village waiting in the mountains. Jake knew what he had to do next. He wasn't running anymore. He was walking toward something worth fighting for. The hidden village. The snow had stopped. The wind had gone quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Jake stood at the edge of the fire, his clothes burned and torn, his hands bruised and shaking. But he was still standing, behind him. The fire crackled low, warming the night. Lyra sat against a tree, weak but awake, her leg wrapped tightly in cloth. Dari curled beside her, eyes full of worry. They had survived, but they all knew more would come. This fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jake knelt in front of Lyra. "You need real medicine," he said. "She said there's a village." Lyra nodded slowly. "High in the mountain spine," she whispered. "Hidden in the cliffs. My people live there, far from the reach of the sky hunters." Jake looked toward the east, where the mountains rose like giants in the distance. It would be a long journey, cold, dangerous, steep. But it was the only way. "Can we reach it? On foot?" he asked. Lyra hesitated, then pointed to a narrow trail through the forest. "There's a path only my kind knows, carved by wind and time," she said. "If we move before sunrise, we may reach the outer ledge before dark." Jake didn't. "Wait!" He began gathering supplies, checking his tools, and building a new sled from the broken shelter walls. Dari helped silently, placing food into pouches and wrapping extra cloth around her mother's arms. As they moved, Dari looked up at Jake. "Why are you still helping us?" she asked gently. Jake paused, then smiled. "Because when someone cries for help," he said, "you answer, even if you're scared." Dari nodded slowly. "My people will remember you," she said. "They'll tell stories." Jake chuckled. "I'm not doing it for stories," he said. "I'm doing it because you're worth saving." They began the climb just as light touched the sky. The forest slowly changed. The trees became twisted. The ground steeper, the air thinner. Every step was harder. But Jake didn't stop. He carried Lyra on the sled, pulled it over sharp rocks, across icy streams, up narrow slopes. Dari walked beside him every time, steady and brave, her small hands. Guiding the way, they crossed a fallen bridge made of crystal vines. They passed stone totems carved with glowing alien symbols, and in the air, strange songs whispered through the wind, as if the mountain itself was watching. Dari pointed to the cliffs ahead. "There," she said. "Beyond that crack in the stone, our village waits." Jake pushed forward, but something made him stop. Footprints, fresh, sharp in the snow. Not theirs, too wide, too deep. He raised his hand. Signaling silence, Dari crouched low, holding her breath. Then they heard it, a faint hum in the air, like machines. Scanners. Jake pulled the sled behind a large boulder and whispered, "They're tracking us again." Lyra opened her eyes weakly. "They must have picked up my heat signal when the medicine started working." Jake looked around, thinking fast. "We can't lead them to the village," he said. "They'll find your people." Dari's voice trembled. "What will we do?" Jake stood up, pulled out his last flare grenade, and handed the sled rope to Dari. "You'll take your mother," he said. "Follow the path, don't look back." "But what about you?" Dari asked. Panic rising, Jake gave her a steady look. "I'll distract them," he said. "I'll draw them away." Dari shook her head. "No, please," she said. "We need you." Jake knelt beside her. "You need your people more," he said gently. "They'll protect you, and maybe I'll find you again." Lyra reached out and touched Jake's arm. "May the stars remember your name," she whispered. He nodded once, then turned and ran through the trees. He moved fast, crashing through brush, making noise on purpose. Behind him, the hum grew louder. The hunters were chasing his signal now. He stopped at the edge of a frozen river and pulled the pin on the flare grenade. He tossed it high and it exploded in a blinding flash of light. Red smoke poured into the air, covering everything. The sound of metal feet came closer, and Jake ran again. He didn't know how far he'd go or if he'd make it back, but one thing was certain: he had bought them time. High above, Dari and Lyra climbed the last narrow path into the mountain. Ahead, a glowing gate opened in the stone, and gentle voices called them home. Dari looked back one last time, and in her heart she prayed the human would return, not as a stranger, but as one of them. The last trap. The frozen forest was burning. Red, not from fire, but from the flare Jake had thrown. Thick red smoke wrapped around the trees, curling like snakes through the air. He ran through it, heart pounding, boots slipping on ice. Behind him, the sound of metal feet grew louder, faster, angrier. Jake ducked behind a rock and caught his breath. His body was aching, arms sore, blood on his cheek. He was tired, but he wasn't done. "They're still coming," he whispered to himself. He reached into his pack. Empty. Only one thing left, a trap he had never used, old, unstable, dangerous even to him. He looked up through the red haze, and there they were, two hunters, tall, armored, glowing red visors scanning the smoke. Jake narrowed his eyes. "Time to end this," he muttered. He placed the last device in the snow, buried it halfway. It was an EMP mine, short range, powerful. He connected it to a broken heat pack and tossed it to the side. The hunters followed the false signal, stepping right into the circle. Boom! Zerk! The blast cracked the air. Lights flickered. The hunters screamed as their suits overloaded, falling to their knees. Jake didn't wait. He charged with a branch sharpened into a spear and struck. One went down hard, sparks flying from its chest. The second tried to rise, but Jake tackled it with a roar, smashing its visor with a rock again and again. When it stopped moving, he rolled off, panting hard, chest heaving. He looked around, silent again, just red mist, broken metal, and blood on snow. But something felt wrong, too easy, too fast. Then he heard it, a voice, calm, cold behind him. "Well done, human." Jake turned, eyes wide. A new figure stepped from the trees, taller than the others, armor black as the void. His mask was smooth with a glowing mark like a scar across the faceplate. This was the leader. "You fight like one of us," the hunter said. "That's rare." Jake didn't move. "I don't want a medal," he said. "I just want your kind to leave them alone," the hunter chuckled. "The mother and child?" he asked. "Such valuable creatures." Jake's jaw tightened. "They're not yours to take." The hunter stepped closer. "Walk away," he said. "You've caused damage, yes, but I can offer you a deal." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What kind of deal?" "Give us the path to the hidden village," the hunter said. "Tell us where they are and you walk free." Jake stared at him, silent. He looked at the blood on his hands, the burning trees, the scars across his arms. Then he thought of Dari's eyes, Lyra's quiet strength, the way they trusted him. No deal was worth more than that. Jake raised his chin. "Go to hell," he said. The hunter tilted his head. "Wrong answer." He lifted a plasma blade and rushed forward. Jake barely dodged, rolling through snow, grabbing a broken spear. The fight was brutal. Blade against metal, speed against instinct. Jake took a hit to the side, sharp pain ripping through his ribs. He screamed but kept going, slashing with. The spear striking the hunter's arm, the blade hissed and fell. The hunter grabbed Jake by the neck, lifting him off the ground. "You should have taken the deal," he hissed. Jake choked, vision fading. Then saw something behind the hunter, a flash of silver, a small figure. Dari. She had come back. She held a long staff taken from one of the broken hunters. With a shout, she swung it hard. The weapon struck the hunter's back. He dropped Jake and turned too slow. Jake used the chance. He grabbed the fallen plasma blade and drove it into the leader's chest. The hunter screamed, armor cracking, sparks flying. He stumbled back, then dropped to his knees and fell, silent. Jake dropped the blade and gasped for air. Dari rushed to him, hugging him tightly. "You came back," he whispered. "I couldn't leave you," she said. "You're my family now." Jake looked up at the sky. The stars were shining again. Behind them, Lyra stood on the ridge, weak but smiling. They had survived the last trap, but what came next would decide everything. A new home. The path to the village was steep. Snow fell softly from the high cliffs as Jake, bruised and bleeding, climbed the last ridge with Dari's help. Behind them, Lyra followed slowly, leaning on a walking stick made from a broken spear. Her leg was still weak, but her steps were steady. They had won the fight, but not without pain. Now all that remained was a final climb. At the top, the mountain opened like a gate. Carved into the stone wall was an entrance covered in glowing symbols. Old and bright, Dari pressed her hand against the center one. The rock shifted with a low hum. The gate opened, revealing a path of light inside the mountain. Warm air rushed out, carrying the smell of herbs, smoke, and life. Jake stepped inside, unsure of what to expect. And then, eyes, dozens of them, all glowing gently in the dark. Alien faces, tall and short, old and young, stepped out from the shadows. They stared at Jake with quiet wonder. A human, carrying their wounded, followed by a child who smiled like she had found home again. A tall elder stepped forward, her robes made of glowing thread. She looked at Lyra, then at Jake. "You brought them back," she said. "Through the storm, the hunters, and the fire." Jake gave a tired nod. "I just did what I had to," he said. The elder raised her hand. "And yet, no one else ever has." They took Lyra into a warm room lined with healing stones and soft music. Her wounds were cleaned, her skin finally at rest. Dari stayed by her mother's side, whispering stories of everything Jake had done. She told them about the traps, the cave, the fights, the courage. She told them how Jake never gave up. Not even when he could have walked away, the villagers listened. And slowly they began to approach Jake. They offered him warm drinks, cloaks, food that glowed like gold in the dim light. He had never seen anything like it. Never felt anything like it. No fear, no suspicion. Just welcome. That night, Jake stood on a balcony overlooking the mountain valley. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the next job, the next planet, or the next escape. He was thinking about staying. Dari joined him, wrapped in a thick woolen coat. She looked up at him, her eyes still shining. "Everyone here wants to know what to call you." She said, smiling. Jake raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well," Dari said, "you're not just a human anymore, you're part of us now." Jake chuckled softly. "What did you tell them?" "I told them you're my protector," she said, "and Mama said you're her shield." Jake looked out at the stars. "Those are big names," he said. "But you earned them," she replied. Suddenly, the elder joined them on the balcony. She held out a glowing crystal wrapped in silver leaves. "This is a mark of our people," she said. "Only those who protect the innocent may carry it." Jake took it slowly, unsure. "I didn't do it for rewards," he said. The elder smiled. That's why you deserve it. In the days that followed, Jake helped repair the village's defenses. He taught them how to track signals, how to disarm traps, how to fight if they had to. But he also learned, from them, how to read their sky maps, how to speak their old tongue, how to cook with mountain fire. He laughed again. He slept without fear. He lived, not as a visitor, but as one of them. And every night Dari would sit beside him and say, "Please, human," she'd laugh. "Tell me the story again." And Jake would smile, clear his throat, and say, "It all started with a cry in the forest."